The wheelchair rolled 3 inches into the street before the man's boot stopped it. Not an accident. He looked down at her, smiled, and not one person in that cafe moved. 62 people, full tables, 2 servers, one manager standing behind the counter with his arms crossed, watching like it was a weather event, something you wait out, not something you stop. The woman in the chair said nothing. Her knuckles went white on the armrest, her jaw locked. She had learned a long time ago that certain rooms would never protect her. What nobody in that cafe knew, what nobody in Blackridge Valley had figured out yet, was that the man sitting in the corner booth with the gray German shepherd at his feet had spent 17 years making sure that powerful people who thought they were untouchable eventually learned otherwise. The dog's ears went flat. That was the beginning. If this story hits different, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Follow along. You don't want to miss what comes next. The fog came down hard on Blackridge Valley most mornings that October, rolling off the ridgeline above town and settling into the streets like it owned the place. By 7:30, it had swallowed the old grain elevator at the edge of Main Street and was working its way toward the cafe windows, turning the town into something that existed only in a 2-block radius. Ethan Cole drove his truck through it without thinking. He knew every pothole between his garage and the center of town, knew the way the road dipped before the old feed store, knew the exact spot where the yellow line had faded so badly it was more of a suggestion than a rule. He'd been driving this stretch for 4 years, long enough to stop seeing it. Ranger rode in the back seat, not in a crate. Never in a crate, not anymore. The German shepherd sat upright, watching the fog through the window with the focused attention of an animal that understood surveillance. At 9 years old, Ranger moved slower in the mornings. His muzzle had gone mostly gray, but his eyes were still sharp, still tracking, still cataloging everything that passed. Ethan pulled into the small lot beside Denny's Mountain Cafe and sat for a moment with the engine running. He wasn't supposed to be here this morning. He had 3 vehicles waiting at the shop, a transmission job on a Ford F250, a brake line replacement on an older Jeep, and a check engine light on a late-model Subaru that he already knew was going to be something expensive and stupid. He had coffee at home. He had reasons to stay there, but he hadn't slept well, and the walls of his garage apartment had been closing in since around 4 a.m., and sometimes you needed to be around other human beings, even if you didn't particularly like them. He clipped Ranger's service vest on, and the dog dropped into working posture, shoulders level, gaze forward, ready. Old habits don't die in military dogs. They just wait. "Behave," Ethan said. Ranger looked at him. "I know. You always do." Post. The cafe was warm in the way that only old buildings manage. A warmth that felt structural, like it was coming from the walls themselves. The smell was coffee and bacon grease and the faint sweetness of something baked that morning, and Ethan felt a small, grudging amount of his tension release as the door swung shut behind him. He counted the room without meaning to. Old habit. 14 tables, 11 occupied, 2 servers, 1 manager visible near the pass-through window to the kitchen. The bar counter ran along the left wall with 6 stools, 4 taken. Exit through the kitchen, exit through the front, fire door at the back marked with a push bar and a small red light. He found a booth in the far corner, slid in with his back to the wall, and Ranger settled beneath the table without being told. A server came over, she, young, maybe 22, with a ponytail and the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this since high school. "Morning, the usual?" He'd been here enough times to have a usual. That bothered him slightly. "Coffee, whatever the soup is today, if you've got it going yet. Chicken vegetable, give us 20 minutes. "That works." She left. He watched the room, not because anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in a small mountain town in October, but because that was what his brain did now and probably would do forever. His therapist, back in the years when he still saw one, had called it hypervigilance and said it was treatable. He'd nodded in all the right places and then spent the drive home cataloging the license plates in the parking lot. That was when he first noticed the woman with the wheelchair. She was sitting near the center of the room, A table by the window where the morning light came through, even with the fog, diffuse and gray-white, the kind of light that makes everything look a little like a photograph. She had dark hair pulled back, and she was reading something on a tablet propped against the sugar dispenser, and she had a mug of coffee in her left hand. There was a fabric tote bag hanging from the back of her wheelchair and a folded piece of paper on the table beside the tablet that looked like a list of some kind. She looked like someone who had organized her morning carefully, someone who came prepared. Ethan looked away. None of his business. He took out his phone and opened the parts invoice he'd been putting off reviewing. The F250 needed a rebuilt torque converter, and he'd been waiting on a quote from his supplier in Roanoke. The numbers weren't going to be pleasant. He scrolled through the line items, not really absorbing them, and drank his coffee when it arrived. He was 3 sips in when he heard the chairs. They came in loud. That was the first thing, the volume. Not shouting, not yet, but the particular loudness of men who are comfortable enough in a space to announce themselves without trying. 3 of them. Late 30s to mid-40s, the kind of built-to-be-noticed look that came from gym memberships and self-satisfaction. They wore work clothes that were too clean to have actually worked in that morning. The kind of men who owned things. Ethan knew the type. He dealt with the type in 8 different countries on 4 different continents, and the address changed, but the energy didn't. They took the table adjacent to the woman with the wheelchair. Not because it was the only one available, there were 2 open tables further toward the back. They chose that one specifically, and they were still talking among themselves like she wasn't there, but Ethan caught the eye flick. The deliberate not looking that is actually a kind of looking. He set his phone down. Ranger's ears moved. Not standing, just swiveling, like radar adjusting. The server brought the 3 men coffee. They were polite to her in the aggressive way that men are polite to servers they find attractive. She smiled the kind of smile that means thank you for not being worse than this, and moved on. For about 90 seconds, nothing happened. Then one of them, the one nearest to the woman's table, heavy-set with a jaw like a cinder block, shifted his chair back without looking, and it caught the side of her wheelchair. She grabbed her coffee mug before it could tip. "Hey," she said, even-voiced, careful. The man looked at her like he was surprised she was there. "Didn't see you," he said. One of his companions snorted into his coffee. Not a laugh. Something quieter and more considered than that. "It's fine," the woman said, and went back to her tablet. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The cinder block ones. Ethan would later learn his name was Dale Pruitt, and that he managed 3 of Victor Whitmore's commercial properties and had been doing so for 11 years. Leaned back in his chair again. This time, he was watching her. Open about it. Head turned, chin slightly up, the body language of a man who has never been told to stop. "What is it you're doing there?" he said, like they were already in a conversation. She didn't look up. "Reading." "Reading?" He said it like the word was strange. "What kind of business does someone like you have to read about first thing in the morning?" The cafe didn't go quiet exactly, but it changed. The register of ambient noise shifted. Conversations continued but became slightly less animated, slightly more attentive to something other than themselves. The woman set her tablet down. She looked at him. And Ethan could see from across the room that she had run this calculation before. How much energy to spend, how much to absorb, what the cost was either way. And he could see that she hadn't finished running it yet. "I don't think that's your concern," she said, just being friendly. He glanced at his companions. "Hard to tell sometimes, right? What people want. You can be friendly somewhere else." The second man, thinner, with a watch that was too nice for whatever he actually did, laughed at that. Not unkindly exactly. More like he was appreciating the sport. "She's got a point, Dale." Dale wasn't listening. He was looking at the tote bag hanging from the back of her wheelchair and at the handmade-looking items visible through the mesh, small woven things. Ethan couldn't tell exactly what from distance. "That your business?" Dale said. "You make those?" "Yes." He picked up his coffee. "My ex-wife did crafts, kept her occupied." The third man made a sound that might have been a cough. The woman's jaw went tight. She didn't say anything. She reached for her tablet, and then Dale's foot moved. Ethan wasn't sure if it was deliberate, wasn't sure he'd ever know for certain, and it caught one of her wheelchair wheels, and the whole chair shifted sideways, and the tote bag swung, and two of the woven items fell out and landed on the floor. She had to reach for the wheel to stabilize herself. In the process, her coffee went over and spread across the table and into her lap. The entire cafe watched. Nobody moved. Below Ethan's table, Ranger stood up. Not aggressively, not with hackles raised or teeth showing. He simply stood up and stepped out from under the table and stood at Ethan's side and directed the full focus of his attention across the room, and he made a sound low in his chest that was not quite a growl, more like a statement. Ethan was already on his feet. He crossed the room in 8 steps, which he counted without meaning to, and he crouched down and picked up the 2 items from the floor and set them on the table beside the tablet. They were small woven keychains. Intricate, careful work. The kind of thing that takes time and skill and patience. He didn't look at Dale yet. He looked at the woman. "You all right?" She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, somewhere between wariness and something more complicated than that. "I'm fine." Her voice said she had been fine through a lot of things she shouldn't have had to be fine through. He straightened up, took one of the cafe napkins off her table and set it over the coffee spill, which did basically nothing but was what was available. Then he looked at Dale. Dale was looking back at him with the careful expression of a man who is recalculating. "Can I help you?" Dale said. He put just enough distance between the words to make it not quite a threat. "No," Ethan said, "but I think you owe this woman an apology." The cafe was fully quiet now. The server near the counter had stopped moving entirely. Dale tilted his head. "That an accident, friend. I didn't see her." "You didn't see the chair?" Ethan's voice was flat, not angry, just factual. "It's bright red. It takes up about 8 square feet. I saw it from the far corner before you walked in." The thin man with the watch put his coffee down. "Nobody's trying to make a thing of this," he said, with the practiced reasonableness of someone who is absolutely trying to make a thing of this. "Then apologize and we're done." Dale looked at Ranger. Ranger looked at Dale. There was a beat of something there. Not intimidation exactly, just recognition. The dog had a kind of stillness that some people understood instinctively as the stillness of an animal that doesn't need to perform. "Nice dog," Dale said. "Apologize," Ethan said. Another beat. Long enough that it felt like something was about to break. Then Dale looked at the woman and said, "Sorry about your stuff," in a tone that meant nothing, and turned back to his coffee. Ethan stood there for a moment. He knew it wasn't enough. He knew the woman knew it wasn't enough. But the cafe was watching and the math of the room had shifted, and sometimes you take what the situation gives you. He turned to the woman. "I'm Ethan," he said. "I've got a garage on Route 9. If you want me to look at your chair, make sure nothing's bent, you're welcome to bring it by. No charge." She studied him for a long moment. "Claire," she said finally. "Claire Morgan." Ranger stepped forward and sat beside her chair, and she looked down at him, and something in her face shifted just slightly. Not quite a smile, more like the recognition of something unexpected. "He's beautiful," she said. "He knows," Ethan said. "It's becoming a problem." She laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, and it changed her whole face. And in that moment, Ethan noticed 2 things. The first was that Dale Pruitt was watching them from across the room with an expression that had moved past annoyance into something colder and more deliberate. The second was that Ranger had not fully relaxed. The dog was sitting calmly beside Claire's wheelchair, but his eyes kept going back to the 3 men, and the set of his ears was not the set of an animal that had decided everything was resolved. Ethan had worked with Ranger long enough to trust that. He had learned the hard way, in rooms far more dangerous than this one, that there was a difference between a threat that had ended and a threat that had paused. Chapter 2. She didn't come to the garage that day. She came the next morning, around 9, when the fog was still working its way down the ridge. Ethan heard the approach before he saw her. The specific sound of a power wheelchair on the cracked asphalt of his lot. Electric hum, and the click of the chair navigating a dip near his front entrance that he kept meaning to patch, and never did. He walked out front, wiping his hands on a shop rag. The chair was a mid-range model, maybe 6 years old. The frame was solid, but the right rear caster was slightly canted, not enough to affect steering significantly, but enough to cause extra resistance over longer distances. More importantly, the footrest on the right side had a crack in the mounting bracket that he could see from 10 feet away. "That footrest," he said by way of greeting. She looked down at it. "Yeah. How long?" 4 months, maybe. It doesn't affect anything critical." "It will." He crouched down and examined the bracket without touching it yet. "You hit something? Or just where?" "Hit a lip at a parking garage. The edge wasn't ramped properly." "Did you file a complaint?" "Did it get fixed?" He looked up. "No," she said. He stood. "I can replace that today. The caster on the rear right needs adjustment too. You're losing efficiency, especially on inclines. You've got some play in the joystick control wiring that I'd want to check while we're at it." She was watching him with that same appraising quality she'd had in the café, like she was figuring out where to place him on a scale she'd been developing for years. "You know a lot about power chairs for a car mechanic," she said. "I was an Army investigator for 17 years. Before that, I was a motor pool sergeant. I've worked on vehicles of all kinds." He paused. "Also, my mother used a chair. Manual, not power, but same basic engineering principles." Something shifted in her face at that. Not sympathy, or not just sympathy, more like recognition. "How much?" she said. "I said no charge." "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. You gave me a reason to get out of my own head yesterday morning. That's worth something." He held the shop door open. "Come in. Coffee's bad, but it exists." She came in. Ranger met her at the door with the focused gentleness he'd developed around people he'd decided were important, which happened rarely enough that Ethan had learned to pay attention when it did. The dog pressed his head briefly against her knee, not asking for attention, just offering presence, and then moved back to his corner bed and watched. The garage smelled like oil and metal and the faint chemical undertone of brake fluid. There was a Ford pickup on the lift and a Jeep on jack stands and a small workbench along the near wall covered in a precise arrangement of tools that was the most organized thing in the space. The rest was controlled chaos: parts catalogs, a coffee maker on a folding table, a whiteboard on the wall with job timelines written in blue marker, and a few vehicle diagrams sketched in the corner. Claire looked at the sketches. "You drew those," she said. Not a question. Thinking out loud, "I don't like reading manuals. You prefer to figure it out yourself. I prefer to understand how something actually works versus how someone documented that it works. Those aren't always the same thing." She looked at him again with that appraising expression. "Military investigator," she said. "What does that actually mean?" He pulled a stool out for her, then started examining the footrest bracket properly. "Means I spent 17 years finding out what happened when official reports said nothing happened." He tested the bracket. "Interrogations, evidence collection, following chains of custody, some undercover work, a lot of waiting in vehicles." "That sounds lonely." It was exactly as lonely as it sounds. He worked. She drank the bad coffee and didn't complain about it, which told him something. They were quiet for a while in the way that people are quiet, when they're actually comfortable, rather than just waiting to talk again. "Those men yesterday," she said finally. "You know them. Dale Pruitt manages the Whitmore properties on the east side of town. The one with the watch is Kevin Marsh. He handles—" She paused. "He handles things for Victor Whitmore." Ethan kept working. "What kind of things?" "Victor wants to redevelop the old mill district. There are 6 properties that he needs that he doesn't have yet. Most of the owners took deals over the past 2 years. Her voice was even, controlled. "Mine is one of the ones remaining." Ethan sat back on his heels. He looked at her. "How long has this been going on?" he said. "The pressure?" "About 18 months. She set down the coffee mug. "It started with offers. Then the offers got less polite. Then there were code inspections at my house. 3 and 6 months, always for things that had been fine the previous inspection. Then the rumors." Her jaw set. "The usual playbook. What do they say about you?" "That I'm unstable, that I've been making complaints against neighbors, that I'm difficult." A pause. "One of them told someone at the hardware store that I wasn't capable of managing property on my own." Ethan turned back to the chair. "What happened to your legs?" he said. He kept his voice the same, flat, factual, no performance of sensitivity. She didn't flinch. He'd known she wouldn't. She didn't seem like a person who flinched at direct questions. "Car accident. 7 years ago, on Route 12, coming back from a supply run. Someone ran a light at the intersection by the old dairy. The impact was on my side of the car." "What did the report say?" "Rain, poor visibility, negligent driver. Settled out of court." Her voice had gone slightly flat now, the flatness of something rehearsed into neutrality. "I was in the hospital for 2 months, in rehab for 6 more. By the time I was out, most of my legal options had expired." "Most," Ethan said. She looked at him. "You said most of your legal options had expired." A long pause. "There was a window I didn't use. I was—" She stopped, started again. "I was exhausted, and I'd been told repeatedly that I didn't have grounds for anything beyond what I'd already settled. My lawyer at the time was a sole practitioner with no capacity for litigation. I believed him." Ethan finished examining the bracket and stood up. He went to his parts wall and found what he needed without looking, which meant he'd been thinking about this repair since yesterday. "I want to tell you something," he said, not looking at her yet, selecting the right bolt gauge. "And I want you to understand I'm not saying it to be dramatic, or because I have some angle." "Okay?" she said. He turned around. "Ranger doesn't react to things without reason. Yesterday in that cafe, he stood up before I'd fully processed what was happening. That means he caught something I hadn't registered yet." "It was 3 men being aggressive," she said. "It was 3 men being deliberately aggressive," Ethan said. "There's a difference. Random cruelty is opportunistic. What happened in that cafe had a shape to it." She was very still. "He picked that table," Ethan continued. "He shifted his chair twice before it caught your wheel. I watched him. The 3rd time wasn't an accident. It was a decision." Silence. "You think Dale Pruitt engineered that scene?" she said. "I think he manufactured an incident in a public place that he knew would embarrass you without looking like direct intimidation. And I think he knew the room wouldn't intervene." Ethan set the bolt down. "I've seen this before. Not here. Other places, other contexts. But the architecture is the same. They're trying to establish a narrative, isolated, difficult, fragile." He looked at her. "They want people to believe you can't handle your own affairs." The garage was quiet except for the sound of wind against the roll-up door and Ranger shifting on his bed. "That's a significant accusation to make about something that looked like a cafe accident," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." Another pause. "Are you usually right about these things?" she said. He thought about it seriously rather than answering automatically. "Often enough that I stopped dismissing my instincts. Not often enough to be certain." He picked up his wrench. "But Ranger stood up, Claire. And he's not standing down." They both looked at the dog. Ranger was watching the garage door. Men. Ethan worked on the chair for 2 hours. He replaced the footrest bracket with a stronger mounting than the original. He adjusted the caster, replaced the joystick wiring connector that had been causing intermittent resistance, and cleaned and re-lubricated the drive wheel bearings. When he was done, the chair ran noticeably smoother, and he could tell by Claire's expression when she tested it, the way her posture shifted slightly, the small breath she let out, that the difference was more significant than she'd been letting on. "You've been running on that bracket for 4 months, he said. "It was functional. Barely." He cleaned his hands. "You got used to compensating for it." "I get used to compensating for a lot of things." It wasn't self-pity. It was just a statement of operational reality, the kind you make about conditions you've long since adapted to. He respected that kind of honesty. She was at the garage door ready to leave when she turned back. "The driver," she said, "from the accident. Do you know what happened to him?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't have any details beyond what you've told me. His name was Barry Colton. He was cited for the accident, paid a small fine. He left town about 8 months later." She looked at the floor. "I heard through someone that he found work in Harrisburg, that Victor Whitmore's company has a property management contract there." She looked up. I always thought that was a coincidence. Ethan said nothing. Maybe it is, she said. Maybe, he said. She left. Ranger watched the door for a long time after the sound of her chair faded down the lot. Chipboard, Chapter 3. That evening, Ethan made himself cook dinner instead of eating from a gas station, which was his usual standard of self-care on days that had been complicated. He made pasta with canned tomatoes and too much garlic and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, feeding pieces of bread to Ranger while he thought. He had a system for thinking, had developed it over years of investigative work. You laid out what you knew for certain, you laid out what you suspected, you laid out what you couldn't know yet but needed to, and you kept those three categories strictly separate, because the moment you let suspicion bleed into fact, you started building cases out of confirmation bias instead of evidence. And confirmation bias was how innocent people went to prison and guilty ones walked free. What he knew for certain, Dale Pruitt had behaved aggressively toward Claire Morgan in a public place. Victor Whitmore was attempting to acquire Claire's property. Claire had been in a serious accident 7 years ago that had not been fully investigated. Barry Colton, the driver cited in that accident, had subsequently found employment connected to a Whitmore company. What he suspected, the café incident had been engineered. The pressure campaign against Claire was coordinated. There may have been more to the accident than the official report reflected. What he needed to know, almost everything else. He washed his plate and dried it and put it away, and he looked at Ranger, who was watching him with the ancient patience of an animal that has learned to wait. I know, Ethan said. He went to the second bedroom, the one he used as an office, and sat down at the desk and opened his laptop. He had contacts still, from his years in the Army, from the Criminal Investigation Division, from colleagues who had left the service before him and found work in law, private investigation, insurance fraud, journalism. A network built slowly over 2 decades of doing difficult work in difficult places. He started with the public records. The accident report from 7 years ago was archived in the county database. He pulled it up and read it carefully. Then he read it again. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling and was quiet for a long time. There was a discrepancy. Small. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it specifically, or if you didn't know what properly formatted accident reports looked like, which Ethan did because he'd read approximately 4,000 of them. The rain condition cited in the report corresponded to a particular visibility rating that required specific witness documentation. There were 3 witnesses listed. 2 of their statements were in the file. The third one wasn't. A missing witness statement could mean a dozen things. Clerical error, misfiling, the witness declined to provide a formal statement, any number of procedurally mundane explanations. It didn't mean anything by itself. But it was there, and it was absent, and those were 2 different things. Ranger put his chin on Ethan's knee. Yeah, Ethan said. He thought about Claire's voice when she'd said, I was exhausted. The particular quality of flatness in it. The way you spoke about a period of your life that you had survived but never fully processed. He thought about Victor Whitmore, whom he didn't know personally, but had heard discussed in the way that small-town power figures were always discussed, carefully, in qualified terms, never directly, always with a sideways acknowledgement that the careful tone was itself a form of tribute to his reach. He thought about a dog that stood up in a cafe before Ethan had fully registered the threat. He reached for his phone and texted a former colleague in Richmond, a woman named Ortiz, who now worked for an insurance investigation firm and who owed him a favor that dated back to a very bad week in Kandahar that neither of them talked about anymore. Need a quiet pull on a traffic accident from 7 years ago. Black Ridge Valley, County Records, driver, Barry Colton. Specifically looking for any suppressed or missing documentation. Can you look? The response came back in 6 minutes. You still collecting strays? He thought about that. Seems like it, he typed back. I'll see what I can find. Give me a few days. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark and thought about the missing witness statement and about the way Ranger was still watching the door. It was 3 days later, on a Thursday morning, when Ethan drove past Claire's property for the first time. Not to stop, not to surveil, just to understand the geography. Her house sat on a half-acre lot on Millbrook Road, on the east end of the old mill district. It was a modest place, Older construction, maybe 1960s, but well-maintained in the ways that mattered. The ramp to the front door was solid and freshly painted. The garden had been put to bed for winter carefully, with mulched beds and protected perennials. There was a small workshop addition on the side, a newer structure, maybe 10 years old, with a wide door and good window light. That was where she made the things she sold. He understood that now. The lot directly next to hers was empty. Had been for 2 years, he'd heard, since the previous owner took a Whitmore offer and moved to Florida. The lot on the other side was a small commercial building that had been vacant for 18 months. Her property was surrounded. He kept driving. On the way back, he passed a black SUV parked at the corner of Millbrook and Route 9. 2 men inside, not looking at anything in particular, which was its own kind of looking. He noted the plate number without slowing down. When he got back to the garage, he ran the plate. It came back to a property management company registered in Northern Virginia. A company that, when he ran it 3 more levels through the registration tree, ultimately traced back to a holding company that held 3 of Victor Whitmore's commercial developments. Ethan sat at his desk for a long time. Ranger stood at the window. This wasn't a pressure campaign anymore. This was a surveillance operation, and someone had decided they needed to know Claire Morgan's daily movements. He called her that evening. "There's a black SUV that's been sitting on the corner of Millbrook and Route 9, he said. "Don't react when you pass it tomorrow. Don't look at it directly. Just be aware it's there." A pause. "How long?" she said. "I don't know. I spotted it today. The plates trace back to a Whitmore holding company." Another pause. Longer. "Ethan?" Her voice had changed slightly. Not fear exactly. Toko, something more controlled than fear. "What is this?" He thought about how to answer that honestly without telling her more than she was ready to process. "It's someone who's decided that what they want is more important than what you're allowed to keep," he said, "and it's someone who thinks they've already won." "Have they?" He looked at Ranger. "No," he said, "but they don't know that yet." The line was quiet for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It wasn't suspicious. It was a genuine question, the kind people asked when they'd stopped expecting help and couldn't parse it when it appeared. "Because you didn't deserve what happened in that café," he said, "and because Ranger stood up." He paused. "And because there's a witness statement missing from a 7-year-old accident report, and that bothers me more than I can explain." Silence on the line, then, "What witness statement?" His hand tightened on the phone. "From your accident, Claire. There were 3 witnesses listed in the official report. I found documentation for 2 of them." He kept his voice careful. "The 3rd statement isn't there." The silence that followed was different from the others. It had a different weight. "Someone's name was on the report," she said slowly. "I remember. When I was in the hospital, they told me there had been witnesses. 3. I asked about them at one point, and the lawyer said it didn't matter because we were settling anyway." "Do you remember the name?" "No." A beat. "But I kept a folder. From the hospital. Paperwork from that period. I haven't opened it in years." "Don't open it tonight," he said. "Do it tomorrow, when it's daylight, when you're rested." He paused. "And Claire, don't take that folder anywhere. Don't photograph anything and send it anywhere, not yet. Just find the name if you can." "You think my phone is—" "I don't know, I'm being careful." He looked at the wall. "There's a difference between paranoia and precaution. Right now I'm operating on precaution." "Okay," she said. She said it like someone who had just made a decision. "Okay," she said again, and this time it sounded less like acknowledgement and more like something hardening. Us. The next afternoon she called him back. "The name is Thomas Garrett," she said. "He was listed as a witness. Address in Black Ridge Valley, and—" She stopped. "What?" "And there's something else in this folder. A letter. From an attorney I don't recognize." Her voice had changed again. Something careful in it now, like she was moving through a space she didn't want to disturb. "It's a draft. Never sent. It says—" She stopped again. "Claire. It says they had evidence of prior knowledge of hazardous vehicle conditions and potential third-party liability in the engineering of the collision." Her voice was very controlled now, very flat. Ethan, this letter is dated 2 weeks after my accident. He was already standing up. Did your lawyer ever tell you this letter existed? He said. No, she said. Did you sign anything in the month after your accident that you didn't fully read? He said. A long, terrible silence. I signed a lot of things, she said. I was on painkillers. I was in a hospital bed. My sister brought me things and said they were routine. She was handling everything because I couldn't. A pause. My sister had worked for a Whitmore company for 3 years. The words landed in the silence between them. Outside the garage, the wind had picked up, and Ranger had stopped watching the window. The dog had turned toward the door. Ethan heard the crunch of tires on his gravel lot before he saw the headlights. 2 vehicles. Moving slowly. I have to call you back, he said. He ended the call and was already moving to the door when the knock came. Not on the front, but on the side entrance, the one that led directly to his office. 3 knocks. Deliberate, evenly spaced. Ranger stood between Ethan and the door. The dog wasn't growling. He was completely, absolutely silent. And in Ethan's experience, that was worse. Ethan didn't open his door right away. That was the first thing. Most people, when someone knocked, opened the door. It was social reflex, the automatic response of people who had spent their lives in places where knocking meant a neighbor or a delivery or something ordinary. Ethan had spent enough time in places where knocking meant something else entirely that the reflex had been replaced with a beat of assessment. Who, how many, why the side door, why now? He moved to the small window beside the office door and looked out without positioning himself in front of it. The 2 vehicles in his lot were a black SUV. Not the same one from Millbrook Road, but the same model, same tinted glass. And a silver sedan that was trying to look unremarkable and mostly succeeding. 3 men visible from this angle. Possibly a 4th in the sedan, hard to tell. Ranger was still at the door. Still silent. His weight was forward on his front legs, head lowered slightly, which was the posture of a dog who had made a decision and was waiting to act on it. Easy, Ethan said quietly. He went to the door and opened it. The man standing there was not Dale Pruitt. He was taller, maybe 50, with the careful grooming of someone who wanted to look like money without looking like he was trying to look like money. Gray at the temples. Good coat. The kind of shoes you noticed because they were too good for a garage lot in October. Behind him, positioned at the edge of the building rather than directly at the door, stood a younger man in a dark jacket who was doing a poor job of pretending he wasn't security. Mr. Cole, the man said. He had a voice that was accustomed to rooms where it was the most important voice. That's me, Ethan said. My name is Leonard Marsh. He extended a hand. Ethan shook it once, briefly. I work with Victor Whitmore's development group. I was hoping we might talk. About what? A small, accommodating smile. The kind that had been practiced in mirrors. About Black Ridge Valley. About community development. About the kind of future this town could have. You drove 2 vehicles and 4 men to my garage at 7 in the evening to talk about community development, Ethan said. The smile didn't waver. I like to be prepared. For what? A beat. Mr. Cole, I understand you've recently become acquainted with Claire Morgan. Ethan didn't say anything. Ms. Morgan is a complicated situation, Marsh continued. She's been through a great deal, obviously, and we have nothing but sympathy for her circumstances. But she has some misunderstandings about the nature of Mr. Whitmore's plans for this area, and those misunderstandings have led to some, let's call it resistance, that isn't really in her best interest. Whose interest is it in? Everyone's, ultimately. The redevelopment project would bring jobs to this area, tax revenue, infrastructure improvements. There are residents who've been waiting for this kind of investment for 20 years. He spread his hands slightly. Ms. Morgan's property is the final piece. The project can't proceed without it, and the offer on the table is genuinely generous, more than market value by a significant margin. Then she'd have accepted it, Ethan said. Marsh looked at him for a moment. Sometimes people make emotional decisions that work against their own interests, he said, especially people who've had difficult experiences and have perhaps developed a certain rigidity. He paused to let that land. We were hoping that someone she's recently come to trust might be able to help her see the practical reality of her situation. The wind moved through the lot, and Ranger shifted his weight. "You want me to talk her into selling," Ethan said. "We want you to help her make an informed decision." "She's already informed. She's operating on incomplete information, and on another careful pause, some historical grievances that may not be entirely well-founded." Ethan looked at him for a long time. Then he stepped back slightly, which Marsh read as an opening, and started to move forward, and Ranger moved into the doorway between them with the absolute unhurried certainty of an animal who understood thresholds. Marsh stopped. "There's a figure we could offer you as well," he said. His voice had shifted slightly, lost a layer of warmth. "For your assistance in this matter, a consultation fee. Significant." "No," Ethan said. "Mr. Cole, we're done with this conversation." Ethan kept his voice even. "You drove out here to see what I know and whether I could be bought. Now you know both things. You can leave." Marsh studied him for a moment with the expression of a man filing information away. "You were Army CID, he said. 17 years. Good record, mostly. Some disciplinary notations near the end. A disagreement with command over how an investigation was handled. Resigned rather than accept a transfer." He tilted his head slightly. "A man with that kind of history might find that creating conflict with established community figures makes an already difficult transition to civilian life considerably harder." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you context." He smiled again, colder now. "Think about what I've said. We genuinely prefer a cooperative solution." He turned and walked back to the SUV. The man in the dark jacket followed him, and both vehicles backed out of the lot and onto Route 9 and were gone. Ethan stood in the doorway until their taillights disappeared. Ranger pressed against his leg. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I know." He went back inside and sat at his desk and was very still for approximately 90 seconds, which was the time he generally needed after something like that to let the adrenaline clear enough to think properly. His hands were completely steady. That part had always been the case, even in the worst situations. His hands stayed steady. It was everything internal that had to work to catch up. They'd run him. Background investigation, the kind you commission when you want leverage. They'd found the disciplinary notations from Fort Bragg, the disagreement over the Callahan case, the investigation that command had wanted closed quickly and Ethan had not wanted to close at all. They'd found the resignation. They thought those things were vulnerabilities. What they hadn't understood, what people who used background checks as weapons generally didn't understand, was that a man who had already lost the career he'd built because he refused to compromise an investigation was not a man who could be scared away from one. He picked up his phone and called Ortiz. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you have something," he said. "I have something and I have something else," she said. "The accident report. I found the discrepancy you were looking at. The third witness, Thomas Garrett. His statement was filed with the county originally, but it was pulled from the public records 6 weeks after the accident." "Pulled by whom?" "That's where it gets interesting. The removal request came from a county official named Harold Briggs. He retired 2 years ago. Before he retired, he consulted for 3 separate companies. 2 of them were Whitmore entities." Ethan wrote the name down. "What's the second thing?" "Barry Colton, the driver. I ran him forward from the accident. He did move to Harrisburg, worked property management for a Whitmore subsidiary for about 3 years. Then he left that job, and I lose him for about 8 months, and then he shows up in a court filing in Roanoke as a plaintiff in a personal injury case." A pause. "Ethan, the filing references his own history of a, and I'm quoting here, pre-existing undisclosed brake malfunction on a vehicle he owned in the period prior to the Black Ridge accident." The garage was very quiet. "He was in another accident," Ethan said. "A minor one. He filed because he wanted compensation. His own filing references the brake issue, which means he either knew about it before Black Ridge or he was trying to establish a pattern for legal purposes." Another pause. "If that vehicle had a known brake issue before the accident with Claire Morgan, then the crash wasn't negligence," Ethan said. "It was a foreseeable outcome. And anyone who knew about that vehicle and put it on the road anyway would be looking at something much more serious than a traffic citation." He sat back. Outside, the wind had picked up enough to rattle the roll-up door in its frame. "Ortiz," he said, I need to find Thomas Garrett. Already looked. He still lives in Black Ridge Valley, runs a small landscaping operation. He's not hard to find. A pause. Ethan, be careful. Whatever this is, it's been buried for 7 years and somebody worked to keep it buried. People who do that work don't unbury it quietly. I know. Do you need anything else? He thought about the folder Claire had described, the unsent letter referencing prior knowledge and third-party liability, the lawyer who had never sent it and never told his client it existed. Not yet, he said. Thank you. He ended the call. Ranger had relocated to the far corner of the garage where he could watch both the main door and the office simultaneously. The dog had been doing this more frequently in the past few days, positioning himself in sight lines, tracking doors. Some of it was age. Some of it, Ethan thought, was something more considered. He made himself eat something, the leftover pasta from 2 nights ago, which had not improved with time. And then he sat at his desk and opened a fresh notebook and began writing down everything he had in 3 columns. Known, suspected, unknown. The known column was getting longer. The unknown column was getting more specific, which was its own kind of progress. You didn't need to know everything. You needed to know exactly what you didn't know, so you could figure out which unknown mattered most. Right now, what mattered most was Thomas Garrett and what he had seen 7 years ago on Route 12 in the rain. He found Thomas Garrett the next morning at a diner on the edge of town. Not Denny's Mountain Café, a different place, smaller and less frequented, the kind of establishment that existed for people who needed breakfast and not atmosphere. A woman at the landscaping supply place on County Road 4 had told him Garrett ate there most Fridays before his first job of the day. Garrett was at a corner table, eating eggs and reading a paper copy of the local weekly, which Ethan hadn't known still existed. He was maybe 60, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who had worked outdoors for decades, with rough hands and a careful, wary face that looked like it had learned to be careful over time, rather than being born that way. Ethan sat down across from him without asking. Garrett looked up from his paper. "Mr. Garrett," Ethan said, "my name is Ethan Cole. I want to ask you about an accident on Route 12 7 years ago." The wary quality in the man's face deepened and shifted. It didn't become hostile, exactly. It became guarded in a way that looked practiced, like a door that had been locked so many times it had learned to lock itself. "I don't know what you're talking about," Garrett said. "You were listed as a witness in the accident report. You saw the collision involving Claire Morgan. I wasn't there." "Your name is on the report, Mr. Garrett?" "Names get on things." He folded the newspaper. "I don't have anything to say about that." Ethan put his hands flat on the table. Not threatening, just visible, just present. "The statement you gave was pulled from the public record 6 weeks after the accident," he said, "by a county official with ties to Victor Whitmore. Whatever you saw that day, someone worked to make sure it stayed buried." He paused. "That means what you saw mattered." Garrett was looking at the table. "I have a family," he said, quietly, almost below audible. "I know." "You don't know." A flash of something, not anger, sharper than anger. "You don't know what these people can do in a town this size. Who gets work? Who doesn't? Who gets their permits approved? Who has trouble with their taxes?" He picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking. "I talked to someone once, after. And within a month I lost 2 commercial accounts I'd had for 4 years. Somebody convinced them to go with another company." He looked up. "You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes," Ethan said. "And I'm not asking you to do anything yet. I'm asking you if what you saw was different from what the report said." A long silence. Outside, a truck went past on the county road, and the diner windows shuddered slightly in its wake. "The report said rain and low visibility," Garrett said finally. His voice had dropped further, barely conversational now. "It was raining. That part's true." He stopped. Ethan waited. "That car, the one that ran the light, it came through fast. Too fast for rain, definitely. But it didn't look like a man who didn't see the light." He pressed his mouth together. "I was maybe 40 feet back on the cross street. I had a clear line of sight. That car came through without slowing at all, but it wasn't fishtailing, wasn't swerving. The brake lights never came on. He met Ethan's eyes. Not once, not before the light, not when he saw her car, not when he hit her. No brakes at all, Ethan said. No brakes at all, Garrett confirmed. And afterward, when he got out of the car, he wasn't panicked. He was looking around. A pause. Like he was checking for something. Not like a man who just accidentally nearly killed someone. His jaw worked. That's what I told the first officer who came to me. And then 2 days later, a different person came and asked me to write out a statement for the record, and they showed me what they wanted it to say, and He stopped. You signed it, Ethan said. No judgment in it, just the fact. My daughter was 12, Garrett said. I had a business I'd built for 15 years. He looked down at his eggs, which had gone cold. I've thought about it most days since. Ethan let the silence sit for a moment. I'm going to be honest with you, he said. What you just told me. No brake lights, no panic response, looking around afterward. That changes what happened on Route 12 from an accident to something else. And the brake issue on Colton's vehicle may have been known in advance. He paused. If that's the case, Claire Morgan didn't lose the use of her legs because of rain and a careless driver. She lost them because someone decided she was going to. The color in Garrett's face had shifted. That woman, he said slowly. The one in the accident, she's still in town? She is, and Victor Whitmore is currently running a coordinated pressure campaign to force her off her property. Garrett put his hand over his mouth briefly and looked at the window. Something was happening behind his eyes. The calculation Ethan had watched other people run, the one between what was safe and what was right, and the terrible grinding weight of the distance between those two things. I'm not asking you for a decision right now, Ethan said. I'm telling you what I know, so that if a time comes when you're asked to make one, you know the full shape of what you're deciding. He left a card on the table, just his name and number, nothing else, and stood up. That woman, Garrett said again, without turning from the window. Is she okay? She's still standing, Ethan said, which, considering everything, is more than most people would manage. He left. Yeah, that afternoon Claire came to the garage again. She hadn't called ahead. He heard the chair on the lot and walked out front, and she was there in the gray light with her jaw set in a manila folder across her lap, and an expression that meant she'd spent the last 18 hours in a state of controlled rage that was beginning to exceed the controls. My sister, she said when he reached her. Her name is Sandra. She worked for a Whitmore subsidiary, Palmer Development, which manages commercial leasing in the county. She held out the folder. I went through everything in this box last night. There are 4 documents with her handwriting on the signature witness line. 4 things I signed in the hospital. I didn't read any of them properly. Her voice was steady, but it cost her something. He could see what it cost. I trusted her. He took the folder carefully, opened it. Have you talked to her? He said. She moved to Phoenix 3 years ago. We don't speak much. A pause. We fell out over... I thought it was over nothing. She got distant after I started rebuilding things here. I thought she felt guilty about not being around more during my recovery. Her mouth pressed together. Maybe she did. Maybe it was something else. He looked through the documents. A release of liability, standard on its face, a statement of settlement terms. 2 things that were buried under what looked like insurance paperwork and would have been easy to overlook when you were exhausted and medicated and believed you had nothing left to fight with. The unsent letter was there too, at the back. He read it twice. The attorney who had drafted it was named Paul Weston. He had a small practice in the county. Ethan had heard the name. Local attorney, mostly estate work, occasional personal injury, not a litigator. This letter, Ethan said, Weston drafted it, never sent it. Do you know if he's still practicing? His website still exists. I checked this morning. I want to talk to him. He closed the folder. Not yet. Not until I have more of the picture. He looked at her. Are you all right? It was a genuine question, not a courtesy. She looked at him like she was deciding how honest to be. No, she said. I'm angry. I'm very angry, and I'm... She stopped. I spent a long time believing that what happened to me was just misfortune. Bad luck, the kind of thing that happens to people. She looked at the folder in his hands, and now I don't know what to do with the possibility that it wasn't. What do you want to do with it? I want to know the truth of it, all of it. She met his eyes directly. And then I want it to mean something. I'm not going to sit on this and do nothing just because doing something is difficult. He nodded. Okay, he said. Then we need to be careful and we need to be patient. Whatever is in this folder, we can't move until we have enough that it can't be dismissed or buried again. He paused. They came to see me last night. Her expression didn't change, but something in her went very still. Marsh, he said. Leonard Marsh. He offered to pay me to convince you to sell, and when I said no, he mentioned my disciplinary record from the Army. He said it flatly. They researched me. They wanted to know if I could be discouraged. Can you? She said. The question was serious. I resigned from the Army because I wouldn't close an investigation that my commanding officer wanted closed, he said. The case involved a contractor who was skimming off supply routes in a forward operating area, and the CO had financial ties to that contractor. I filed a formal complaint. The complaint was investigated, and the investigation was redirected into something about my conduct. He paused. I couldn't fix it from inside, so I left and sent everything I had to a journalist instead. He looked at the folder again. The story ran. The contractor was prosecuted. The CO retired quietly with a reduced pension. He met her eyes. So no. I can't be discouraged by people who think a bad record is a leash. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Ranger, she said. The dog had come out of the garage behind Ethan and was sitting at the edge of the lot watching the road. How long have you had him? 8 years. He was assigned to me in Kabul. We were together for the last 4 years of my service, and I applied to adopt him when I separated. He paused. It took 7 months of paperwork. The Army doesn't make that easy. But you did it. He'd have been retired to a kennel. He'd worked for 6 years. He deserved better than a kennel. He watched the dog watching the road. He saved my life once, in a compound outside Coast. We were clearing a building, secondary structure, and he stopped moving about 4 feet inside the door. Just stopped, refused to go further. He was quiet for a moment. There was a pressure plate in the floor 3 feet ahead. It was the only time in the whole op that our sweep missed something. It was quiet. He knew, she said. He knew something was wrong. I don't know if dogs think in terms of knowing, but his body knew before my brain caught up. He looked at her. In that cafe, he stood up because something was wrong. Not just the men being unpleasant, something underneath that. The intent of it. He paused. I've learned to trust what he catches before I catch it. She looked at Ranger. He's been through a lot, she said. So is everyone worth knowing, Ethan said. The wind came down off the ridge and moved through the lot, and Ranger turned his head slightly toward it and then back toward the road. The following week was a campaign of smaller things. Claire received a letter from the county building department scheduling an inspection of her workshop structure. The 4th inspection in 8 months. The letter cited concerns about structural compliance with recently updated accessibility codes, which was the kind of language that sounded official and meant very little but could, in the right hands, be used to make a structure uninhabitable on paper while leaving it physically standing. Then her internet service went out for 4 days. The provider's technician couldn't identify the cause and eventually attributed it to a line issue outside her property, a line that ran through the vacant lot next door, which was owned by a Whitmore entity. Then a rumor began circulating at the hardware store, the feed supply, and at least one town council meeting to the effect that Claire Morgan had filed nuisance complaints against 3 neighbors, which she hadn't. Ethan heard about it from the woman who ran the fabric shop next to his garage, who mentioned it in passing with the tone of someone sharing information they found mildly suspicious, but not quite suspicious enough to question publicly. He drove to the town council offices and asked to see the complaint record. No complaints had been filed. He asked the clerk, a tired-looking woman who appeared to have been in that office for a very long time, if anyone else had been in to check the records recently. She looked at him over her reading glasses. Leonard Marsh's office called last week, she said. They wanted to know if there were any active disputes involving the Millbrook Road properties. What did you tell them? That's public information, she said. I told them what the record shows, which is nothing. Which is nothing, she agreed, but that's not usually how people use that kind of call. She gave him a look. They're building something. When they call to confirm there's nothing, it's because they're about to say there is. Ethan went back to his garage and called Claire. Don't go to the council meeting Thursday, he said. They may be planning to raise the complaints publicly. I'm not going to hide from a lie, she said immediately. I know, I'm not suggesting hiding. I'm suggesting that if they raise it in a public forum, we want to be able to respond with documentation, not just denial. Denial alone, even true denial, sounds like defense. Documentation shuts it down. He paused. I can be there Thursday. I can pull the council records myself and present them. This is my fight, Ethan. Yes, I know. He was careful with this. I'm not trying to take it from you. I'm trying to make sure you win it. A pause. Fine, she said, but I'm going. Wouldn't expect otherwise. Honk. Thursday's meeting was held in the community room of the old firehouse on Main Street. Folding chairs, fluorescent lighting, a podium with a microphone that only worked intermittently. Ethan arrived early and took a seat near the back where he could see the room. Ranger sat at his feet in his service vest and immediately became the most interesting thing in the space, which Ethan had long since accepted as part of traveling with a German Shepherd in public. Claire arrived 10 minutes before the meeting started. Dale Pruitt was already there, seated on the right side with Kevin Marsh, and two men Ethan didn't recognize, all four of them arranged in the relaxed configuration of people who expected the evening to go the way they wanted. Pruitt noticed Claire when she came in. He watched her navigate to the accessible area near the front without expression, and then he looked toward the back and found Ethan, and the expression he gave Ethan was the expression of a man recalculating something. The meeting covered the usual: road resurfacing, a noise ordinance amendment, a rezoning application for the commercial strip on Route 9. Then, toward the end of the agenda, the council chair, a man named Dennis Fuller, who had the exhausted quality of someone doing a civic duty he had not fully anticipated, read from a prepared statement about recent community concerns. He said that the council had received reports of ongoing disputes involving properties in the Millbrook Road area and that the council would be seeking more information before any formal action was taken. He didn't name anyone. He didn't need to. Heads turned. Claire raised her hand. Fuller looked at her with the expression of a man who had been hoping to move past this item. Ms. Morgan, I'd like to know the source of these reports, she said. Her voice was clear and completely even. If there are formal complaints in the public record relating to my property, I have a right to review them. I requested those records earlier this week and found nothing on file. A murmur through the room. From the right side, Kevin Marsh said, The council isn't specifically referencing your property, Ms. Morgan. Then who are you referencing? A pause. Marsh smiled his practiced smile. We're just asking the council to look into some general concerns in the area. What concerns specifically? This isn't the appropriate venue. You raised it in this venue, Claire said. If there are specific documented concerns, I'd like to see the documentation. If there aren't, I'd appreciate the council noting for the record that no complaints exist on file against my property. Fuller looked down at his papers. He looked like a man who wanted to be somewhere else. Ethan stood up. Mr. Fuller, he said, I pulled the council complaint records yesterday. The clerk's office confirmed that no active disputes or complaints are filed for any Millbrook Road property. I have a copy of the records here if the council would like them entered into tonight's minutes. The room was quiet. Fuller looked at the copy Ethan held, looked at Marsh. Marsh's smile was still there, but it had changed quality. That would be fine, Fuller said finally. Ms. Morgan, Mr. Cole, thank you. For the record, the council confirms there are no active filed complaints for the properties in question. He moved his papers. Moving on. It was not a victory. It was a small, concrete counter-move, the kind that mattered not because it changed anything directly, but because it established a record. Because it put something on paper that couldn't be retroactively modified. Because the next time someone tried to raise the rumor at the hardware store or the feed supply, there was a public record that could be cited. Afterward, in the parking lot, Dale Pruitt walked past them on his way to his truck. He didn't stop. He didn't say anything. He looked at Ethan once, and the look was not angry, it was assessing, which was, in Ethan's experience, more serious than anger. Anger made mistakes, careful assessment made plans. Keyed. That night Ortiz called him back. I found Thomas Garrett's original statement, she said, the one that was pulled. Ethan sat up straighter. Where? Old county archive that hadn't been properly digitized. Physical copy, misfiled under a different case number. Either accidentally or deliberately, hard to say. A pause. Ethan, his original statement says the vehicle that struck Claire Morgan's car showed no brake response from approximately 40 meters out. He specifies the visibility was adequate to see the light. He states the driver appeared to have been moving with the collision rather than attempting to avoid it. He was on his feet without realizing he'd stood. He put it in writing. And then someone got to him and replaced it with a statement saying he witnessed a vehicle lose control in wet conditions. Another pause. There's also a note in the file, handwritten, unsigned, that says, per HB, remove from public index. HB Harold Briggs. The county official who consulted for Whitmore entities. The garage was silent. Ranger had come to stand beside him. Ortiz, Ethan said, how solid is this? It's a physical document in a county archive. Chain of custody isn't perfect. It was misfiled, which cuts both ways. But it's there, it exists. If someone with legal standing wanted to introduce it, she stopped. You need an attorney, Ethan. A real one, not a sole practitioner. This is beyond what we can do from the outside. I know. And you need Garrett to confirm it. If he confirms his original statement, I've already spoken to him. A pause. How did that go? He thought about the man's face in the diner. I have a family, the way he'd looked at the window. He told me the truth, Ethan said. Whether he'll say it publicly? That's a different question. What are you going to do? He looked at the whiteboard on the wall, the job timelines, the vehicle diagrams, the notes he'd been adding in the margins over the past 2 weeks. I'm going to find out if Barry Colton will talk, he said, and I'm going to find Paul Weston, the attorney who drafted the letter. Something scared him out of sending it, something that happened in the 6 weeks between when he drafted it and when the accident report was amended. He paused. I want to know what. Ethan, her voice had changed slightly. I need you to be aware of something. The research I've been running, the company traces, the archive search, some of this has a footprint. Not a big one, but if someone is watching those records, then they may already know I'm looking. Yes. He thought about Marcia's visit, the black SUV on Millbrook Road, the way Pruitt had looked at him in the parking lot tonight, not with anger, but with the focused attention of someone recalibrating. They've known since Tuesday, he said. Marsh came to see me before I had most of what I have now, which means they moved fast. He was quiet for a moment. That means they're worried. You don't move that fast on someone unless you think they might find something. Or unless you're making sure they don't. Same thing, he said. After he hung up, he stood in the middle of his garage for a while, thinking through the sequence. What they had, what they still needed, the distance between those two things, and how long it would take to close it. Then he heard it. At first he thought it was wind, but the pattern was wrong for wind. 2 short sounds, then a gap, then something lower and sustained. He moved to the side window and looked out. The lot was dark. The road beyond it was empty. But Ranger had gone to the far wall and was pointing, fully, rigidly, in the direction of the tree line behind the building, with the focused body language of a dog who had identified something specific. Ethan turned off the lights in the office, stood in the dark, watched. For a long time, nothing moved. Then the shadow at the edge of the tree line shifted, and Ethan understood that someone had been standing there in the dark for at least as long as he'd been on the phone, and had been listening to whatever they could hear through the walls. He was already moving toward the back door when his phone lit up with a text from a number he didn't recognize. It said, "You should know what happened to the last person who pushed this." He stared at the screen for 3 seconds. By the time he got the back door open, the tree line was empty. Ranger stood at the edge of the lot, nose working, reading whatever trace the dark had left behind. He stood at the back door for a full minute, phone in hand, tree line empty, Ranger working the edge of the lot with his nose 3 inches off the ground. The text was still on his screen. You should know what happened to the last person who pushed this. Ethan read it 3 more times, not because the meaning was unclear, it was entirely clear, but because he was cataloging it. The phrasing, the last person, not other people or anyone else. Specific, singular, which meant there was a specific person and a specific thing that had happened to them, and whoever sent this expected him to know what it was or to be frightened enough by the implication not to ask. He took a screenshot and forwarded it to Ortiz with a single line, "Keep this." Then he went inside, locked the back door, and spent 40 minutes doing a slow walk of his property line with a flashlight and Ranger, checking for anything left behind. It was the same process he'd have run on a compound perimeter in the field. Systematic, overlapping arcs, no section skipped because it looked clear. Old habits. He found a cigarette butt near the northeast corner of the tree line, relatively fresh, and photographed it and left it where it was. When he was done, he sat at his desk and accepted that he wasn't going to sleep much, which was fine because he'd operated on worse. The question the text raised wasn't whether they were willing to threaten him. He'd established that. The question was whether the threat was intended to stop him or to flush him, to see how he'd react, whether he'd run, or whether he'd accelerate, because both of those responses told you something about the person you were dealing with. He decided to give them neither. Paul Weston's office was above a tax preparation service on Clement Street, accessible by a narrow staircase that smelled like old carpet and the particular kind of institutional cleaning product used in buildings where the cleaning was more aspiration than practice. The door at the top had a frosted glass panel with Weston Law in black letters that were starting to peel at the corners. Ethan had called ahead. Weston had been reluctant in the way that people are reluctant when they know exactly why you're calling and are still deciding whether to have the conversation. He'd said he had 30 minutes at 10 o'clock. Ethan showed up at 5:02. The office itself was the office of a man who had been practicing alone for a long time and had made a certain peace with not being a large firm. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, most of the volumes well used, a desk buried under an organized chaos of files and yellow legal pads, 2 client chairs that had seen better decades. The man behind the desk was maybe 65, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the careful, precise quality of someone who chose their words the way a watchmaker chose tools. "Mr. Cole," he said. He didn't stand. He gestured at the chair. "Thank you for seeing me. I haven't agreed to anything yet." He folded his hands on the desk. "You mentioned the Morgan case on the phone." "I did. I represented Ms. Morgan briefly in the period following her accident. The representation was limited in scope." "I know, she told me." Ethan looked at him. "She also told me you never told her that you drafted a letter referencing prior knowledge of hazardous vehicle conditions and potential third-party liability." Weston was quiet for a moment. His expression didn't change, which told Ethan that the expression had been prepared in advance of this conversation. "There are aspects of attorney-client privilege that—" "She waived privilege," Ethan said. "In writing this morning, I have a signed authorization." He put it on the desk. Weston looked at it without picking it up. "She wants to know what happened. She has a right to know what happened." "What happened," Weston said, "was that I was a solo practitioner with a general practice and a client who needed more than I could provide, and I made decisions based on what I believed was available to me at the time." "You drafted a letter that suggested grounds for a significantly larger case, and then you didn't send it." "I drafted a letter based on preliminary information that I was not able to verify sufficiently to—" "What information?" A pause. Longer than the others. "Mr. Cole, what is it you actually want from this meeting?" "I want to know why you stopped." Ethan kept his voice even. Not aggressive, just direct. "You saw something. You put it in writing, and then you didn't act on it. In the 6 weeks between when you drafted that letter and when you advised your client to settle, something changed." He looked at the man across the desk. "What was it?" Weston picked up a pen and set it down again. "I received a visit," he said finally. From an attorney representing interests I was not initially able to identify. He informed me that my preliminary theory of the case was based on a misreading of the evidence, and that if I pursued it, I would be subjecting my client to prolonged litigation she was not equipped for, and exposing myself to a potential malicious prosecution finding. He paused. He also mentioned, in passing, that a complaint had been filed with the state bar regarding my conduct in an unrelated matter. Had it been? The complaint was real. It was resolved, eventually, in my favor. It was a frivolous filing, but the investigation took 8 months and consumed significant resources. He met Ethan's eyes. I had one associate and a lease payment and a client in a hospital bed who needed income and stability more than she needed a legal battle she might lose. So you settled her case. I settled her case for the best figure I could negotiate, which was more than the initial offer. His voice had taken on a slightly defensive quality, and he seemed to hear it himself because he stopped and reoriented. I told myself it was the practical outcome. I told myself I was protecting her. Were you? The silence was long. I have thought about Claire Morgan at regular intervals for 7 years, he said. That should answer your question. Ethan leaned forward slightly. The attorney who came to see you, he said. Do you remember his name? His name was Philip Crane. He practiced commercial law in Richmond. A beat. He worked extensively with Whitmore Development. Ethan wrote the name down. Mr. Weston, he said. I'm going to tell you where this stands. I have Garrett's original witness statement, the one that was pulled from the public record. I have documentation tying the removal to a county official with Whitmore connections. I have evidence suggesting Barry Colton's vehicle had a known brake defect prior to the accident, which he himself referenced in a subsequent civil filing. And I have your draft letter. He paused. What I don't have yet is someone with legal standing to bring this forward. Someone who can introduce this evidence in a way that doesn't get dismissed or buried again. Weston was very still. What you're describing, he said carefully, would require a civil action, potentially a criminal referral. The statute of limitations on civil fraud claims in this state is 5 years from discovery, which could be argued to begin from the point at which the suppression became known rather than from the date of the original injury. It's arguable. He picked up the pen again. It would require an attorney with litigation experience and resources. I'm aware. I don't have those resources. No, Ethan said, but you know who does. Weston looked at him. There's an attorney in Charlottesville, he said slowly. Rebecca Hale. She handles civil rights cases and fraud litigation. She's taken on Whitmore-adjacent entities before, not Whitmore directly, but connected interests. She's good. A pause. She would need the full evidentiary package. We're building it. She would need Garrett's testimony. Working on it. She would need... He stopped. He looked at the authorization letter still sitting on his desk. Then he looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was trying to decide if he was physically capable of setting it down. She would need my testimony. About Crane's visit, about what I was told, and by whom. Yes, Ethan said, she would. The room was quiet. On Clement Street below, a truck went through a pothole and the windows shuttered. I'm 65 years old, Weston said. It wasn't a complaint. It sounded more like a man stating the dimensions of his remaining time and considering what to do with them. I know, Ethan said. And you're asking me to testify against interests that once made a frivolous bar complaint disappear when it suited them, which means they could make one reappear when it suited them. Yes. Weston was quiet for a long time. He looked at the authorization letter. He picked it up and read it properly this time, with the glasses pulled down from his forehead, and he read it with the focused attention of someone who had been reading documents for 40 years and understood that the words mattered. Tell Ms. Morgan, he said finally, that I'd like to speak with her directly. The message came 4 days later. Not another anonymous text. Something more direct. A notice from the county building department, delivered to Claire's door by a code enforcement officer, stating that her workshop structure had been found to be in violation of updated fire egress requirements and was to be considered temporarily non-operational pending a compliance review. The review period was 60 days. 60 days during which she could not legally use the space where she made everything she sold. Ethan read the notice when Claire brought it to him, and he read it carefully, and then he read it again. "This is fabricated," he said. "I know it's fabricated. The egress requirements they're citing were updated 14 months ago. Your workshop was inspected 8 months ago and passed. If there were a compliance issue with the new requirements, it would have been flagged at the 8-month inspection. I know that. They're trying to cut your income." He set the notice down. "During litigation, if we pursue it, they want to be able to argue that your property has ongoing compliance issues. They want to make the administration of your property look complicated." Claire was looking at the notice on the workbench between them with the specific quality of stillness she got when she was most angry. Not the surface anger of someone who had been startled, but the deeper structural anger of someone who was deciding something. "They can't just—" she started. "They can't make it stick," Ethan said. "But they can make it take time. That's the point. Time and resource drain and the gradual accumulation of difficulty until it seems easier to take the offer than to keep fighting." "It's not going to seem easier," she said. "I know." He looked at her. "I'm going to Harrisburg." She looked up. "Barry Colton," he said. "He's the one piece of this that can move everything. If he confirms the break condition, if he'll put it on record—" "He won't," she said. "He signed whatever they needed him to sign. He signed it 7 years ago. Things change in 7 years. And he filed his own civil suit referencing that break history, which means he's already created a record that works against him unless he gets ahead of it." He paused. "I'm not going to force him. I'm going to lay out what we have and let him make a decision. And if his decision is no, then we go to Rebecca Hale with what we have, and we let her tell us if it's enough." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what Weston said," she said, "about the statute of limitations, about when discovery begins." "What about it?" "I found out the truth of this less than 2 weeks ago. Before that, everything I had was what I'd been told." She looked at him. "Does that mean the clock starts now?" "That's the argument," he said. "It's not settled law. Hale would know better than I do." "But it's possible." "Yes, it's possible." She looked at the workshop door, the wide door she'd installed herself, with the good window light, the space where she'd rebuilt her income piece by careful piece over 5 years. "Go to Harrisburg," she said. He drove to Harrisburg on a Wednesday, leaving before 5 in the morning when the fog was still thick on the ridge. Ranger rode in the back seat with his chin on the center console, which he wasn't supposed to do and had always done anyway. Ethan let it go. At 9 years old, Ranger had earned whatever comfort was available. The address he had for Colton was an apartment complex on the east side of the city, the kind of place that was functional and anonymous in equal measure. He sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes first, watching. 3 vehicles he could account for as regular residents. No surveillance presence that he could identify, which didn't mean there wasn't one, only that if there was, it was better than what he was used to dealing with. He knocked at apartment 14 at 7:45 in the morning. The man who opened the door looked older than his DMV photo suggested. Colton was in his early 50s, medium height, with the slightly shrunken quality of a person who had lost weight recently and not intentionally. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and the expression of someone who recognized a knock that had been expected for a long time. "Barry Colton," Ethan said. Colton looked at him, looked at Ranger, looked back at Ethan. "You'd better come in," he said. The apartment was clean in the way that suggested discipline rather than comfort. Everything in its place, no personal items visible beyond a few framed photographs on one shelf. Ethan glanced at them. A woman, maybe Colton's age. 2 kids, younger, not children anymore. Probably not living here. Colton didn't offer coffee. He sat in the chair near the window, which put his back to the wall and Ethan across from him, and he held his cup in both hands and looked at the middle distance. "How'd you find me?" he said. "Public records. Your civil filing in Roanoke was searchable." Colton closed his eyes briefly. "I should have used a P.O. box." "Yes." A pause. You're here about Blackridge. I'm here about Claire Morgan. The name did something to Colton's face. Not guilt exactly. Something past guilt. Something that had been through guilt so many times it had worn a groove into him. How is she? He said. It wasn't quite a question. She's in a wheelchair, Ethan said. She has been since your vehicle hit hers on Route 12. Colton nodded slowly, like someone receiving confirmation of a thing they already knew. Did you know about the brakes? Ethan said. A long silence. Yes, Colton said. The words sat in the room. How long before the accident? 3 weeks, maybe 4. I'd been having intermittent issues. The pedal would go soft. Usually came back after a few seconds. I kept meaning to take it in. He looked at his coffee. I was supposed to have it looked at the week before. I canceled the appointment. Why were you on Route 12 that morning? Another silence, longer. Someone asked me to be, he said. Ethan kept very still. They didn't tell me what was going to happen, Colton said quickly, and then caught himself, because that sounded like exactly the kind of thing a person said when they knew what was going to happen and had spent years building the sentence that would make it sound otherwise. He seemed to hear it himself. I don't know how to explain this in a way that sounds like anything other than what it is. Try, Ethan said. Colton set down his coffee cup and put his hands on his knees. A man came to see me about 2 months before the accident, said he was from a development company, said they had a property situation that required someone to document certain road conditions on Route 12 at a particular time of morning. He used that language, document road conditions. He said I'd be in my vehicle, I'd drive the route, and I'd be compensated. That's all he said. He said there might be an incident. He said it would be minor. He said the route I'd be driving was quiet at that hour. Colton's voice was flat now, stripped of everything. I was behind on 3 months of rent. I had a daughter starting college in the fall. So you said yes. I said yes. And the brakes. Colton's hands pressed into his knees. He knew about them, he said. When he came back the week before, he mentioned them. He said the vehicle's condition would actually be helpful for documenting the road conditions because it would make the incident look realistic. He stopped. I understood then what I'd agreed to, but by then I'd already taken money and signed something, and I didn't... He stopped again. I didn't think anyone would get seriously hurt. That's not... I know how that sounds. I know what it is. The room was quiet. Ranger had settled on the floor near Ethan's feet, watching Colton with the focused attention of a dog who understood tension even when it wasn't physical. The man who came to see you, Ethan said. What was his name? He said Marcus. No last name. I never got documentation. Nothing with a company name, nothing that could be traced. He paid in cash. Colton looked at him. But I know what company it was, because when I moved to Harrisburg, it was the same people who arranged the job, Whitmore's people. You worked for them for 3 years. Until I couldn't anymore. He looked at his hands. Then I left. I filed the civil suit in Roanoke because I thought if I had a legal record of my own vehicle's history, if something ever came back to me, I could show I'd disclosed it. I thought it was protection. A pause. It wasn't very well thought out. No, Ethan said, but it created a record. Colton looked at him. What do you want from me? He said. A formal statement. Everything you just told me, on record. The silence was the longest yet. They will destroy me, Colton said. They may try. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. I'm not going to tell you it's safe or easy. Ethan looked at him directly. I'm going to tell you that a woman lost the use of her legs because someone decided her property was in their way. And the people who did that have been doing it to her again for the past 18 months. And they believe they've already won because everyone who saw it happen has stayed quiet. He paused. You stayed quiet for 7 years. I think you know what that's cost you. Colton was looking at the photographs on the shelf. My daughter doesn't know, he said quietly. What I did, what I agreed to. Ethan said nothing. She thinks I was just in an accident, that it was my fault for not getting the brakes fixed, but that it was an accident. He was still looking at the photographs. She's 24 now. She has a kid of her own. A pause. I don't want her to find out from a lawsuit. Then tell her yourself, Ethan said. Before this moves forward, give her the chance to hear it from you. Colton picked up his coffee again. It was probably cold. He drank some of it anyway. When do you need an answer? He said. By the end of the week. After that, we're moving forward with or without you, and the record will show that you were given the opportunity. He hated saying it that way. It had the sound of pressure, which it was, and he would have preferred to operate without pressure because pressure produced compliance rather than decision, and he needed Colton to decide, not comply. But the week was real. Rebecca Hale had agreed to a preliminary consultation, and he wasn't going to hold that up indefinitely. Colton walked him to the door. The woman, he said as Ethan stepped out. Claire Morgan. He looked at the hallway. Does she know who I am? What I did? She knows the driver's name, Ethan said. She doesn't know the full picture yet. Colton nodded. When you tell her, he said, tell her I'm sorry. He paused. I know that means nothing. It doesn't mean nothing, Ethan said. It just doesn't mean enough. He left. He was 2 hours outside of Blackridge when Ortiz called. We have a problem, she said. He adjusted his grip on the wheel. What kind? Someone hit the county archive, the physical one. The office called today because they had an unscheduled access request yesterday evening, after hours, logged under an administrative override code that belongs to an official who retired 18 months ago. They went for Garrett's statement. They went for the file that had the original statement, the handwritten removal note, the cross-reference documents. A pause. It was gone when the archivist checked this morning. Ethan's jaw tightened. Did you make copies? I photographed everything, high resolution. The photographs exist, but the physical document is gone, and if they're claiming the file never contained what we say it contained, it becomes our photographs against their denial. Yes. He drove. Outside, the mountain highway unrolled through the fog that was always moving in or moving out, never fully settled. Ortiz, is the photograph metadata intact? Timestamp, device ID, geolocation? All intact. The photos were taken on my work device, which has verified timestamps and is registered to my company. Then we have a chain of custody argument. It's not airtight, but it's not nothing. Ethan, they're moving faster now. They know you went to Harrisburg. I don't know how, but they do. I got a call this morning from someone identifying themselves as a legal representative of Whitmore Development, asking whether I had been conducting research related to their client's business interests. He was quiet for a moment. What did you tell them? I told them I wasn't at liberty to discuss my client's matters. Then I called you. A pause. They're not being subtle anymore. No, he said. They're not. When he dropped the call, he drove in silence for a while, thinking through the sequence. They'd stolen the physical document. They'd identified Ortiz. They'd moved on the county archive within 48 hours of him finding Colton, which meant either they had surveillance on Colton's building or they had someone watching Ethan more closely than the figure in the tree line suggested. Both possibilities led to the same conclusion. The window was shorter than he'd planned for. He called Claire. She answered on the second ring. How did it go? He was there. He talked. He kept his eyes on the road. Claire, I need to tell you what he told me, and I need you to be somewhere private when I do. A pause. Ethan? It's not good, he said. I mean that what happened to you was not an accident, and someone arranged it, and I have the man who can confirm it on record if he agrees. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he checked the signal. Claire. I'm here, she said. Her voice was strange, very controlled, the way water is controlled by a very narrow channel. Tell me. He told her. He kept it factual and he kept it clean, and he didn't editorialize or manage her reaction because she didn't need managing. She needed information. He gave it to her straight, the way he'd have given it in a field debrief. Who, what, when, and what it meant. When he finished, She was quiet for a long time. "My sister," she said finally. "Sandra." The name had something in it that was not quite a question. "I don't know her level of involvement," Ethan said carefully. "The documents she witnessed, she may have been told they were routine. She may not have known what they were part of. Or she may have known." "Yes." Another silence. "I've been angry since we found the folder," she said. "But this is different." Her voice was still controlled, but it had a different quality now, with something harder at the center. "This is someone deciding. Someone sitting somewhere and deciding that my legs were acceptable." He didn't respond to that because there was nothing adequate to say. "What do we need?" she said. "Colton's decision by end of week. Weston's willingness to testify about Crane's visit. The photographs Ortiz took. And Rebecca Hale needs to tell us what she can do with it." He paused. "They took the physical document from the county archive last night." A beat. "Can they do that?" "They apparently can. We have copies, but we need to move before they find another way to narrow what we have." "When does Hale want to meet?" "I haven't set the date yet. I wanted to see where Colton landed first." "Set it," Claire said. "Whatever Colton decides, set it. We go with what we have." Her voice had the quality of a decision made, not being made, something that had crossed over from deliberation into action. "Okay," he said. "Ethan." A pause. "Thank you for going." "It needed doing." "It needed someone willing to do it," she said. "That's not the same thing." He hung up and drove the last 90 minutes in near silence. The fog had come down fully off the ridge by the time he reached Black Ridge Valley, and the town emerged from it in pieces. The grain elevator first, then the water tower, then the rooftops of Main Street one by one as the road descended. Ranger lifted his head as they came into town. The dog looked out the window at the fog-covered streets with the calm attention of an animal that understood territory. Ethan pulled into his lot and sat with the engine running for a moment. His phone showed 2 missed calls from an unknown number, no voicemail. A text from Ortiz with a photograph. The high-resolution image of Garrett's original witness statement, metadata visible, timestamp showing the date and time she'd photographed it in the county archive. He looked at the image for a long time. Garrett's handwriting, careful, deliberate, the writing of a man who had taken his time forming the words because he understood they mattered. The vehicle showed no brake response from approximately 40 meters before impact. Visibility was sufficient to observe the light clearly. 7 years in a mismarked file in a county archive that nobody had looked at. He forwarded the image to a secure cloud account, then forwarded it again to a second account under a different email address, then sent a compressed copy to a flash drive he'd mailed to Ortiz in the morning. 3 copies in 3 separate locations. Standard practice when evidence had already been stolen once. He got out of the truck. The fog moved around him, cold and damp off the mountain. Ranger hit the ground beside him and stood still for a moment, reading the air, and then walked to the garage door and waited. Inside, Ethan's phone lit up with an email notification. It was from Colton's address. He opened it, standing in the cold. "I'll do it. Let me know what you need." He read it twice, exhaled once through his nose. Then a second notification, a number he didn't know. He opened it. "We know what you have. We know where you got it. This ends here, or we make sure it ends differently." He stood in the fog looking at the screen. Behind him on the road, a vehicle slowed as it passed the lot. He turned, a black SUV, windows dark. It didn't stop. It kept moving, disappearing into the fog toward the center of town. Ranger was standing at the edge of the driveway, watching the road, and the dog was doing the thing he only did when he had identified something as a direct threat. Weight fully forward, head level, absolutely silent. Ethan stood there. He thought about 17 years of tracking criminals in 8 countries. He thought about the Callahan case and the CO who had believed that power was sufficient protection against the truth. He thought about a woman who had rebuilt her life on a half-acre lot surrounded by empty properties and still hadn't sold. He thought about Thomas Garrett eating cold eggs and saying, "I have a family," and saying it again, "I have a family," as if saying it twice could explain everything it meant to be afraid. He thought about Colton's daughter, 24 years old, with a child of her own who didn't know yet. He typed back, "Come find me." He sent it. He put the phone in his pocket and walked inside and started making coffee, because whatever happened next was going to require being awake for a very long time, and the coffee was still bad, and that was fine. Ranger came in and settled on his bed, and for the first time in days, the dog didn't watch the door. He watched Ethan instead, like he was waiting to see what the man was going to do next. The coffee finished brewing at 11:47 and Ethan drank the first cup standing at the counter, thinking through logistics the way he used to think through operational planning. Not what he wanted to happen, but what was actually available to him given the resources and time on hand. What he had. Colton's written confirmation of intent to testify. Ortiz's photographs of the original Garrett statement with intact metadata. Weston's willingness to speak to Claire directly, which Ethan read as willingness to testify given the right legal context. A draft letter from 7 years ago documenting suppressed grounds for a larger civil case. A text message thread that constituted a documented pattern of intimidation. And Rebecca Hale, who had agreed to a consultation. What he didn't have? Time. They'd taken the physical document. They'd identified Ortiz. Someone had been in the trees behind his building. The SUV had done a slow pass on his lot tonight. He poured a second cup and called Hale at 11:58, which was late enough to be rude, and he called anyway. She picked up on the fourth ring. She didn't sound like she'd been asleep. "Cole," she said. "We need to move the consultation up," he said. "They've started destroying evidence. I have everything digitally backed up in 3 locations, but the physical original is gone, and they know we're close." A pause. Not surprised. Assessing. "How close?" she said. "I have a witness who will confirm the crash was arranged. I have a second witness who will confirm his original statement was suppressed by a county official with ties to Whitmore. I have an attorney who will testify that a Whitmore-connected lawyer pressured him off the case 7 years ago." He paused. "And I have a woman who signed legal documents while hospitalized and medicated that she was not adequately informed about." The silence on Hale's end was the silence of someone doing math. "Friday," she said. "My office. 9 a.m. Bring everything." "I'll bring Claire." "Yes, bring her." A beat. "Cole, how much pressure are they applying?" "Tonight someone drove past my property slow. I've had 2 threatening texts from unknown numbers. They ran a background check on me and used it as leverage in a meeting." He paused. "They also got someone into a county archive after hours using a retired official's override code to remove a physical document." "That's criminal access to public records," she said, and her voice had changed slightly, sharper now, engaged. "If you can document the access log, the archivist called about the unauthorized entry. I can get a statement. Get it in writing before Friday. That's potentially a separate charge entirely." Another pause. "Are you safe tonight?" He thought about the question seriously. "I think they're in the intimidation phase," he said. "Moving to something physical would escalate beyond what they can manage quietly. They're not there yet." "And if they get there?" "Then we have a different kind of problem." He drank his coffee. "But we're not there yet." "Friday," she said again, and hung up. He slept 3 hours and was up before the fog lifted. He drove to the county records office when it opened at 8 and asked for the archivist, a woman named Doris Pulaski, who had the exhausted righteousness of someone who cared deeply about institutional procedure and was frequently disappointed by how few people shared that concern. She was angry about the after-hours access in the specific, tightly controlled way of a person who had built their professional identity around the integrity of the thing that had just been violated. She gave him a written statement in 40 minutes. Unauthorized access, timestamp, override code belonging to Harold Briggs, retired. Document removed from file 2017-RC-0449. She signed it and gave him 2 copies and kept one for herself. He thanked her. "Whoever did this," she said as he was leaving, "should be prosecuted." "Working on it," he said. He called Thomas Garrett from the parking lot. Garrett answered after 6 rings, which meant he'd been watching the number decide whether to pick up. "It's Cole," Ethan said. "I know who it is. They took the physical document from the county archive. Your original statement. Someone went in after hours Tuesday night." A long pause. "They know I talked to you," Garrett said. It wasn't a question. His voice had the flat quality of a man receiving information he had been braced for. Probably. I don't know how. Ethan looked at the parking lot. I need to ask you something directly. The photographs of your original statement exist. The archivist has documented the unauthorized removal. If this goes in front of an attorney and potentially a court, your original statement becomes evidence, which means you become a witness. Silence. I told you before I wasn't ready for that. I know. Things have changed since before. Ethan paused. They stole a public document. That's not a pressure campaign anymore. That's evidence destruction, which means they know the original statement would hurt them. He let that sit. The thing you wrote 7 years ago, what you actually saw, it's still true. They can take the paper, but they can't take what you know you saw. More silence. Longer. My daughter, Garrett said. She works at the dental practice on Route 6. She's been there 4 years. The practice owner is a Whitmore commercial tenant. I understand, Ethan said. Do you? Because if I testify and they decide to make things difficult for that practice owner, I understand, Ethan said again. He meant it. I'm not going to tell you the risk isn't real. It is. What I can tell you is that an attorney named Rebecca Hale in Charlottesville is taking this case. She's done this before. And when this becomes a legal matter of record, Whitmore's ability to apply pressure quietly becomes significantly more complicated, because it becomes witness intimidation. Yes. Another silence. This one had a different quality. Not resistance, but something more like a man standing at the edge of something and measuring the drop. When do you need to know? Garrett said. Friday morning. That's when we meet with Hale. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. He hung up and sat in the car, and Ranger put his chin on the center console, and Ethan scratched behind his ear without thinking about it. One more call, he said. He called Claire. The consultation's Friday, he said. Hale's office. I need you to gather everything. The folder, the document Sandra witnessed, the draft letter, the inspection notices, the building department violation order, the text messages, all of it. Organize it chronologically if you can. Already started, she said. Of course she had. How are you? He said. A pause. The kind that meant she was deciding how honest to be, which was a pause he'd learned to read in the past 3 weeks. I called Sandra last night, she said. He was quiet. She picked up. Claire's voice was steady, but something in it was working hard to stay that way. I didn't tell her what I know, I wanted to hear her voice, I think. Wanted to see if I could tell. Another pause. She sounded normal. She asked about the business. She asked about winter. A beat. I don't know if she knew. I don't know if not knowing is better or worse than knowing. You don't have to figure that out right now, Ethan said. I know, but I keep thinking about it. She was quiet for a moment. She's my sister. Whatever she did or didn't do, she's my sister. And if she knew, if she stood in a hospital room and watched me sign things she understood were being used against me. She stopped. I don't know what I do with that. You don't do anything with it right now, he said. Right now you get through Friday. Everything else comes after. You're very good at compartmentalizing. It's a skill I recommend. A short, complicated sound that was almost a laugh. I'll have everything ready. Dartsun. Rebecca Hale's office was the 3rd floor of a restored building in downtown Charlottesville that had the particular quality of a place where serious work got done without performing seriousness. No mahogany, no portraits. A conference table, good chairs, a whiteboard that had been recently erased but not perfectly, and a woman in her mid-50s who stood when they came in and shook Claire's hand first before she shook Ethan's, which he noted and appreciated. Hale had a sharpness that was different from Leonard Marsh's sharpness. Where his was the practiced intelligence of someone who managed perceptions, hers was the intelligence of someone who read facts. She looked at the materials Claire set on the table and began going through them in a systematic, unhurried way that made the room feel like it was working. Ortiz had driven down and was sitting at the far end of the table with her laptop, the photographs already organized by date and document type. She and Ethan had not spoken much beyond logistics since she'd arrived. They had the efficiency of people who had worked together before in circumstances that didn't leave room for small talk. Weston was there as well, which Ethan hadn't been certain about until the man had appeared in the parking lot at 8:50, looking like someone who had not slept well but had decided something. He sat across from Hale and answered her questions about Crane's visit in the precise, careful language of someone giving a deposition, which Ethan recognized as a way of controlling emotion through formality. Hale listened to all of it. She asked questions that were specific and occasionally surprising, not the questions Ethan had anticipated, but adjacent to them, coming at the facts from angles that revealed what she was building in her head. After 90 minutes, she sat back and looked at the table. "The civil case," she said. "Discovery fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, potentially civil conspiracy given the number of parties involved. The statute of limitations argument is viable. I've made it work in comparable cases, and the precedent in this state is favorable since a 2019 ruling that extended discovery timing in active suppression situations." She looked at Claire. "The criminal referral is separate. That's the brake failure, the arrangement Colton described, the document removal from the archive. That goes to the DA's office, and I have a contact there who takes this kind of thing seriously." She paused. "What I need is Colton's written statement, properly executed, and Garrett's testimony." "Colton I have," Ethan said. "Garrett is still deciding." "When does he decide?" "Today. I told him this morning." Hale looked at him. "Call him now." Ethan looked at her for a beat, then took out his phone and called Garrett. Garrett answered on the second ring this time. "We're in Charlottesville," Ethan said, "with the attorney. I need to know." A silence. Then, "Tell me her name." "Rebecca Hale." "I've heard of her." A pause. "She took the Shenandoah Valley water contamination case a few years back." "Yes," Hale said, leaning toward the phone. Garrett was quiet long enough that Ethan counted 12 seconds. "If I come in," Garrett said, "I want to understand exactly what I'm committing to before I sign anything." "That's all I'd expect," Hale said. "And I want it on record that I was coerced 7 years ago, that I signed a statement under duress." "We'll document it," she said. "That's part of the case." Another silence. Shorter this time. "All right," Garrett said. "Tell me where to come." Ethan put the address in a text and sent it. He set the phone down and Hale was already writing, and the room had shifted into something that felt like forward motion for the first time in weeks. Not relief exactly, more like the sensation of a mechanism that had been slowly tightening, finally beginning to turn. Weston cleared his throat. "There's something I didn't mention previously," he said. He was looking at his hands on the table. "About Crane's visit. He referenced another party. He said..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "He said that the situation had the support of people with interests in the county government, and that pursuing it would mean taking on more than just a private development company." Hale stopped writing. "He used those words specifically?" she said. "People with interest in county government?" "Yes." Weston looked up. "I took it as a general warning, but given what you've described about Harold Briggs and the archive access, I wonder now whether it was more specific than I understood at the time." "Briggs," Hale said. "He's retired," Ethan said. "Retired doesn't mean unreachable." She wrote something on her legal pad and underlined it twice. "If Whitmore had a county official suppressing evidence and facilitating document removal, that's public corruption. That changes the category of what we're dealing with." She looked at Ethan. "When you were in the Army, CID work, did you work public corruption cases?" 3, he said. 2 contractors, 1 officer. "How did they go?" "The contractors were prosecuted. The officer resigned and kept his pension. The system protects its own at a certain level." He paused. "But below that level, if the evidence is solid enough..." "It doesn't hold," she said. "It doesn't hold." She turned back to her legal pad. "I want the archive access log, the archivist's statement, and I want you to find Harold Briggs. Not to confront him. I want to know where he is and whether he still has contact with Whitmore interests." "I can have that by Monday," Ortiz said from the end of the table. Hale looked at her. "You're good." "I've been told," Ortiz said without inflection. Garrett arrived at 11:30. He came in wearing his work clothes, which somehow made him seem more credible rather than less. A man who had interrupted actual work to be here, who had not performed preparation. He sat down across from Hale, and she walked him through everything methodically, And he answered in the careful, slightly reluctant way of someone telling the truth about something they wished had gone differently, which was the most convincing kind of testimony Ethan knew. When Hale asked him about the original statement, what he had seen, what he had been asked to sign instead, Garrett told it without embellishment, without the careful legal language Weston used, without drama. He told it the way a man tells something true that he's been holding for a long time. Flatly, with occasional pauses that weren't hesitation, but were something more like grief. Claire sat across the table from him. She had been quiet through most of the morning. She listened with the focused attention she brought to everything, taking notes on a small pad, asking precise questions when Hale gave her space to ask them, organizing and reorganizing the documents in front of her with a methodical quality that Ethan recognized as the way she managed herself when she was feeling too much to show. When Garrett finished, she looked at him. He met her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. The same words he'd said to Ethan in the diner. "I have a family." The inadequate explanation and the genuine grief of it, together. "I know," she said. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Just the recognition that he had lived with this too, differently, and that the weight of it had been real. Hale looked between them and made no comment and moved on, which was the right call. They were there until 2 in the afternoon. When it was done, Hale had 30 pages of notes and a clear-eyed summary of what she was going to file and when and under what theory, and she walked them through it standing at the whiteboard with a marker the way a coach drew up plays, direct, practical, no wasted optimism. "Filing the civil suit triggers discovery," she said, "which means they have to produce their own documents. Which is where things get interesting, because if they've destroyed records, discovery is where we find the gap between what exists and what should exist." She looked at Claire. "This is going to take time. Civil litigation in this state moves slowly, even when you push it. I want you to be prepared for that." "I've had 7 years," Claire said. I can manage more time." "You're also going to face a response. They'll file motions. They'll challenge the statute of limitations argument, even though I believe we'll win it. They'll try to discredit Colton. They may try to discredit Garrett." She paused. "They may go after Ethan's background, the Army record." "Let them," Ethan said. Hale looked at him. "The disciplinary notation," he said. "They mentioned it when Marsh came to see me. I resigned rather than close a fraudulent investigation. The contractor was prosecuted. The story is already in the record if anyone wants to look." He met her eyes. "It doesn't hurt me the way they think it does." She held his look for a moment and then nodded once and went back to the board. Outside the window, Charlottesville moved in its ordinary Friday afternoon rhythm. People on sidewalks, traffic, a delivery truck double-parked on the street below. The ordinary texture of a day that had nothing unusual in it. Ethan watched it for a moment and thought about how much of what happened to people happened inside ordinary days. Inside days that looked like nothing from the outside. Accidents that weren't accidents. Documents removed from files. A woman signing papers in a hospital bed because she was exhausted and medicated and had been told she had no other choice. The texture of ordinary life, and underneath it the decisions that people made when they thought no one was tracking the decisions. He'd spent 17 years tracking those decisions. He was still doing it. That had not changed. On the way out, in the corridor, Claire stopped him. "Are you all right?" she said. It was the question he'd asked her, and she was giving it back to him with the same serious intention. Not courtesy, not performance. He thought about it honestly. "I'm better when I'm doing something useful," he said. "Is that the Army talking or you?" "I don't always know the difference." She looked at him. The afternoon light came in through the corridor window, and she looked tired in the way of someone who had been running hard on a long road, and also something else. Something that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago in the café when she'd grabbed her coffee mug to stop it from tipping. "My workshop," she said. "The violation notice. When this is filed, does that change anything?" "Hale can file for an emergency injunction to stay the enforcement order pending litigation. It won't happen immediately, but it can happen." He looked at her. "You'll be able to use it again." She nodded, looked at the floor. "I made something this week," she said. "In my kitchen, because I can't use the workshop. The light is wrong in there, and the space isn't set up for it. It took 3 times as long as it should have." She paused. "I kept working on it anyway." "What was it?" something I'd been putting off. A piece I designed a long time ago but kept saying I wasn't ready for. She looked up. Being told I couldn't work in my workshop apparently convinced me I was ready. He almost smiled. That tracks. It does, she said, and something in her settled very slightly, like a structure that had found its footing. That evening, Ethan drove back to Black Ridge alone. Ortiz had gone back to Richmond. Claire had driven herself in the van she used for transport, modified for hand controls, and he'd followed her as far as the county line before she'd turned off toward Millbrook Road, and he'd continued to Route 9. His garage was as he'd left it. He checked the perimeter out of habit and found nothing new. Inside, the whiteboard showed the job timelines he'd been neglecting. The F25OH's transmission was overdue. The Jeep was done, but uncollected. Ordinary work waiting, patient and indifferent to everything else. He fed Ranger and made himself eat something and sat at his desk. On the whiteboard, he had started writing things in the margin when the case had gotten complicated. Names, dates, connections. He looked at it now. The map of what had been done, and to whom and who had enabled it. Victor Whitmore's name was nowhere on any of the documents they had. Not directly. Everything ran through proxies. Marsh, Crane, the holding companies, the retired county official. That was always how it worked at a certain level. The distance between the decision and the hands that carried it out, maintained carefully over years, plausible at every individual link. Hale had said, when they were wrapping up and Claire had stepped out for a moment, "We may not get Whitmore directly. We get what we can prove." He'd understood that. He'd seen it before. The Callahan case. The contractor had gone to prison. The CO had retired. The contractor was the one who'd signed the checks. The CO had simply created the environment in which the checks got signed. Sometimes the environment was as far as you could reach. But Hale had also said, in the same quiet tone, discovery is where we find out what they thought they could afford to do in writing. He thought about that. He thought about 7 years of someone believing this was done and settled and buried, and what kind of records a person kept when they thought something was buried. He went to make another cup of the bad coffee, and his phone showed a message from Colton. Told my daughter tonight. She didn't say much. She left, and I don't know if she'll call back. I want you to know that I told her before I could talk myself out of it, for whatever that's worth. Ethan read it twice. He typed back, "It's worth something." He meant it. He set the phone down and the garage was quiet around him, and Ranger was asleep on his bed with his legs extended the way he slept when he'd decided the space was safe, which was the best security assessment Ethan had. He sat at his desk and looked at the whiteboard. Harold Briggs, retired county official. Living somewhere in this state or nearby, probably, the way people who retired from small county positions tended to stay in the region close enough to the networks that had defined them. Ortiz would find him by Monday. When she did, Ethan was going to want to have a conversation. Not to confront him, Hale had been clear about that, but to understand how deep this went, and whether Briggs had been the ceiling of it or just another floor. His phone lit up again. This time, it was a number he recognized. The archivist, Doris Pulaski. He answered. "Mr. Cole," she said. She had the clipped, controlled voice of someone managing upset through professionalism. "I wanted you to know. I filed a formal complaint with the county administrator today regarding the after-hours access, and I was informed this afternoon that my complaint had been referred to the county council's office for review." A pause. "The county council's office is headed by Margaret Briggs." He was quiet for a moment. "Harold Briggs's wife," he said. "His daughter," said Pulaski. He sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "Keep your copy of the statement somewhere off-site." "Already done," she said. "I'm not naive, Mr. Cole." He believed her. He put the phone down and looked at the ceiling. Harold Briggs, retired. His daughter runs the county council's office. The complaint about unauthorized archive access referred to the office of the man whose name was written on the note in the stolen file. The circle was smaller than he'd thought, which meant it was tighter, which meant it was more fragile. Things that were tightly constructed could be very difficult to break, and then, when they did break, they broke completely. He wrote Margaret Briggs's name on the whiteboard, connected it to Harold, connected Harold to the file note, connected the file note to Garrett's statement, connected Garrett's statement to Route 12, connected everything. In the end, back to Claire Morgan sitting in a hospital bed 7 years ago signing things she hadn't read while her sister stood witness, and somewhere across town, a man named Victor Whitmore had a property he needed. Ethan looked at the board. He was not a violent man. He had worked in violent contexts and understood violence as a tool, and also understood its costs in the way that only people who had been close to it genuinely understood costs. He didn't want to hurt anyone. That wasn't what this was. What this was a record. All of it. Every statement, every photograph, every document and date and name was a record. And a record, properly built and properly presented, was the most durable thing a human being could make. More durable than power. More durable than money. More durable than the carefully maintained distance between a man who made decisions and the hands that carried them out. He finished his coffee. Outside, the mountain fog had come down fully, and Blackridge Valley had disappeared into it again, the way it did most nights. The town reducing itself to a few lights visible from his window, everything else absorbed into the dark and the weather. Somewhere in that fog, on Millbrook Road, Claire Morgan was in her kitchen, in the wrong light, making something she'd been putting off for a long time. And somewhere in the county, in whatever comfortable house he'd retired to, Harold Briggs was probably sleeping without any particular difficulty. That was going to change. Ethan turned off the lights and went to bed and slept better than he had in 2 weeks, which surprised him slightly when he woke up. He lay there in the gray early morning and thought about why. He decided it was because things were in motion now, properly in motion, with the kind of structure that couldn't be quietly redirected. Hale's filing would create a public record. The DA contact would create a separate track. The archivist's complaint, even referred to the wrong office, was now documented, which meant its referral was documented, which meant that if it disappeared, the disappearance would be part of the record too. They could still come at him, at Claire, at Garrett, or Colton, or Weston. But they couldn't put everything back in the box. That was the thing about evidence properly handled. You couldn't unring the bell. You could fight it, challenge it, delay it, try to discredit it. But you couldn't make it not exist. He got up and made coffee and fed Ranger and stood at the window looking at the ridge until the fog thinned enough to show the tree line, gray-green against a pale sky, the way it looked every morning before the day decided what it was going to be. His phone showed a message from Ortiz sent at 6:42 a.m. Found Briggs. He's in Waynesboro. And Ethan. He has a storage unit rented under his wife's name. Has had it for 6 years. I think you should let Hale know before you do anything else. He stared at the message. A storage unit. 6 years, started 2 years after the accident, around the time the investigation would have been considered fully closed. He forwarded the message to Hale with a single line. Call me when you see this. Then he stood at the window with his coffee and watched the day come in off the ridge, slow and gray and full of what it had yet to show. Hale called at 7:23. The storage unit, she said without preamble. I'm filing for a subpoena today. If Briggs kept physical records, anything he was paid to suppress, anything that documented his arrangement with Whitmore, that unit is where they'd be. People like him always keep insurance. She was right. Ethan had seen it before. The people who did dirty work for powerful men rarely did it without holding something back for themselves. Not out of principle. Out of self-preservation. How long? He said. 72 hours if the judge moves fast. She usually does. She did. 3 days later, with a court officer and Hale present, they opened the unit in Waynesboro. Inside were 4 bankers' boxes. Inside the boxes were 7 years of Harold Briggs's careful, meticulous, deeply incriminating records. Payment logs, correspondence with Philip Crane, internal memos from Whitmore Development referencing the Route 12 situation by name. One folder, rubber-banded and labeled in Briggs's handwriting, contained a copy of Garrett's original statement alongside a handwritten instruction that read, Per LC request. Remove from index. Retain copy here. LC Leonard Crane, the attorney who had visited Weston. The circle closed completely. Sit. The civil suit filed 6 weeks later. The criminal referral went to the DA's office the same week. Victor Whitmore retained 4 attorneys and issued a public statement about his commitment to community development in Black Ridge Valley. Leonard Marsh was not available for comment. Harold Briggs hired a lawyer, and within 48 hours of the subpoena becoming public, his daughter resigned from the county counsel's office. The redevelopment project was suspended pending investigation. The building violation notice against Claire's workshop was withdrawn. None of it happened cleanly. There were motions and counter-motions, and a period of 6 weeks in January where Hale called Ethan every few days to say that things were progressing, and he could hear in her voice that progressing meant grinding forward through mud rather than moving with any particular grace. Garrett was deposed and held together. Colton gave his statement in writing, and then, in a development nobody had planned for, gave a second statement to a journalist from the state paper who had picked up the story and was not letting go of it. The story ran on a Sunday. By Tuesday, it had been picked up by 2 national outlets. On a Wednesday morning in late February, Ethan drove past Claire's property on Millbrook Road and the workshop lights were on. He could see them through the wide window she'd installed herself. Warm and yellow against the gray winter morning, the silhouette of her at the work table, doing whatever she was building. He didn't stop. He just noted it. That evening she called him. The settlement offer came, she said. Hale thinks we should hear it out. What do you think? A pause. I think I want to hear it. I also think I want to be in the room when Victor Whitmore's people say the number out loud. She paused again. I want them to have to say it to my face. Then that's what we do. Ethan. Her voice shifted slightly. You could have walked away after the café, after Marsh came to your garage, after the text messages. I could have, he said. Why didn't you? He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, the way she'd asked him to answer things. Honestly, not quickly. Because Ranger stood up, he said, and because I'd spent 17 years building cases for institutions that sometimes buried them anyway. This one I could build for a person. He paused. That felt different. She was quiet. It was different, she said. The settlement came 3 months later. Not everything they'd asked for. It never was. But enough to matter. Enough to be real. The legal agreement Claire had signed in the hospital was voided. The criminal investigation into Whitmore and Briggs continued separately, outside anyone's control to settle away. The Black Ridge Valley Town Council, at its April meeting, formally acknowledged irregularities in county record-keeping and commissioned an independent review. Dennis Fuller, the council chair, looked tired throughout the whole proceeding, but he read the resolution aloud without flinching, which Ethan thought was probably the best anyone could ask of a tired man. Thomas Garrett was in the room. He sat near the back. He didn't speak. When it was over, he found Ethan in the parking lot. That's it? Garrett said. That's the beginning of it, Ethan said. The rest takes longer. Garrett nodded, looked at the building, looked at Ranger. How does he know? Garrett said. The dog. How does he know when something's wrong? I've been trying to figure that out for 8 years, Ethan said. Best I can tell, he just pays attention. Garrett looked at Ranger for another moment, then walked to his truck. Summer came to Black Ridge Valley the way it always did. Late, fast, green flooding the ridge overnight. Claire expanded her business and took on 2 orders she'd have turned down a year ago because she hadn't trusted that things would remain stable enough to fulfill them. Ethan fixed the pothole at the entrance to his lot, which he'd been meaning to do for 4 years. Small thing. It took an afternoon. One evening they sat outside her house with the last of the light going orange on the ridge, Ranger between them on the grass, older and slower but present, still watching the road with the mild focused attention of an animal that understood its work. Are you staying? She said. She meant in Black Ridge Valley. He understood that. Yeah, he said. I think so. She nodded. Didn't make anything of it, just nodded and looked at the ridge. The light went. The ridge went dark. Ranger put his head down on his paws. The people who the world writes off as finished, the ones too tired, too broken, too far from what they used to be, they are sometimes the only ones still willing to look directly at the thing everyone else has agreed to stop seeing. That's where the truth tends to wait.